It's good to be back. I've been away for a couple of weeks, at least away from you guys. I'll actually be here for the next week too, so 2 weeks on. We have been working for the last 4 weeks with Arun Gandhi's The Gift of Anger. If you've been with us, you know that it's been a powerful journey. I thought I sort of took on the book with Sue's recommendation. I've just been reading along as we go, and I was curious how we were going to spend a whole book on anger. What really unfolded was we got to experience not only the teachings about anger, but really the book unfolded an understanding of how to align with a life of peace and love. How to be that in the world. Powerful. One of the things we talked about at our 9 o'clock outside service is just because we've spent 4 weeks working on anger, and for many of us, working on anger for most of our lives, it doesn't mean that we're ever going to figure it out. One of the things we have to understand about being human is that it can be quite surprising and can come up in ways that we never imagined before. And so certainly part of the process too is having compassion with ourselves and opening to the possibilities of life and working with whatever it is that arises in our life. I was excited to take on this lesson. The book, instead of being divided into chapters per se, it's divided into lessons for us to look at. And this is lesson number 10. It comes very close to the end of the book, and it seemed so appropriate because it's about you will be tested. So here we've gone through 9 different lessons, and Sue and I have picked 4 of them to speak to you about. And we can often think on our spiritual journey, okay, I've got this. Yeah, I've got it, right? And then the universe comes in and throws us a curveball. And so often, everything we've learned seems to go out the window. And it's important for us to understand, and it's really the 5th step of our Unity basic teachings, that it's not enough to read and study and talk. At some point, you got to engage with the teachings, and that's where we learn, that's where we grow, that's where we mature. And so, in this chapter, Arun is informing us, that indeed he has definitely grown. He's back in South Africa. His family has recently come back to South Africa because of unrest in India. His grandfather is still there, really holding the high watch, continuing to work with the unrest that's happening in India. And Arun says that opens this chapter by saying that he's walking home from school with his sister, his younger sister, and she is frustrated and sort of having a meltdown. And he says, in the past, that would have really frustrated him and brought him to anger. But from being in the presence of his grandfather, of being sort of taken under his wing by his grandfather, that he has a much greater understanding of what's going on for his sister, compassion for his sister, and he has a toolbox that allows him to really be there with her in her meltdown without having a strong response. But then a gentleman from one of the ashrams comes seeking him out and says, Arun, you need to get home, and you need to get home fast. And what he finds out when he's home is that his grandfather has been assassinated. And making a long story short, he's angry about it. And he wants to kill the guy that has killed his grandfather. And his parents, point out, have you forgotten everything that your grandfather taught you? And boy, isn't that the truth? I mean, when these things come up, we're really not even thinking, are we? If we are treading areas that we have not tread before, where we didn't realize that maybe we had some kind of issue, often everything we know can seem to go out the window, and we go back into some patterned way of being. Can you relate? And this isn't an opportunity to beat yourself up. This is just us acknowledging what it's like to be human, what we have to go through as human beings. I've been curious for myself, why does this happen? And wouldn't it be fun to say it only happens like once every few years? But no, it happens with some frequency. It's a bummer. But as I reflected on it this week, I think science can give us actually some understanding of it. And I'm thinking about the development of neural pathways in our mind and how, when big energy comes up, anger is a big energy. When it comes up, it's going to tend to take the path of least resistance. And often it's through those big, well-defined pathways. And the pathways of survival are big in us. When we were born, we were totally dependent on our parents, and we couldn't communicate. And so we had to put up with whatever our circumstances were. I mean, we could cry, we could express ourselves as best we could, but if we had a wet diaper and it was irritating, until someone came and changed it, we had to be with it. Or if we were hungry, or if the food we had been fed was making us colicky. I mean, there can be so many things that go on for us that develop these pathways to help us to get rid of that negative stimulus. And certainly anger is one of them. We also learn how to repress our feelings or suppress our feelings. I mean, we learn so many well-defined patterns in order to survive. Remember, too, our nervous system was not developed, so these patterns are based on a young child that couldn't handle nearly as much as we could. But because they're so defined in us, they often become the go-to. That is, unless we work spiritually. Because in our spiritual work, we are practicing, right? We are practicing and taking on those narrow pathways and picking consciously new ways of being. New ways of focusing that energy, of being in the world in a different way. And as we continue to practice and practice and practice, those new neural pathways become just as prominent as the old and become the go-to for the energy of our life. One thing that really caught me in this chapter was in talking about his grandfather. Arun said that his grandfather said we had to be intelligent with our anger. And the quote that goes along with that was, what would be the best use of the anger you feel now? What would be the best use of the anger you feel now? With the insinuation that all that energy, all that life force that is captured in anger can be used for good. But it's not going to be very effectively used when we're in that angry state, right? Like Arun was resentful that his grandfather had been taken away from him. He wanted to kill the guy that did it. And so, that's sort of that eye for an eye mentality. And he quotes his grandfather in saying that if an eye for an eye just makes the whole world blind. And it's really talking about what Sue was talking about last week, the whole humility, the need to see that while we can be so frustrated when someone does something to us or impacts our life in some negative way, right, that we want them to in some way pay for it, to suffer through it, we don't recognize that we do the same things to others. And in fact, it's nearly unavoidable. You come to understand that when you work with people, that our issues don't all line up together. So the very thing that you can think you're doing for good really frustrates some people. In fact, I don't know if there's anything that you can purely do that's going to make everyone happy, that's going to keep everything copacetic. And so we've all done something that someone wants to take our eye for, gouge our eye out for. We'd all be walking around blind. Not very effective. And so, the question then becomes, and I want you to, if you've got some ideas for yourself, don't hesitate to type them into the chat box, but how do we begin to free the energy of our anger so that it can be used for something for good, something that maybe brings about change, or something that makes a situation better for others? Arun gives some examples of what he and his family did to deal with his anger. His parents particularly saw that he needed some kind of outlet for what he was experiencing. Very close to his grandfather, but couldn't go to the funeral service because it was being held very soon after his death. No way for them to get there. And so his dad had the great idea of, why don't we throw a service right here in South Africa? There's so many people that loved your grandfather. Let's do something here. And not only did they do that, but they set up to do a commemorative, say it again? Yeah, they did a tribute. Thank you. Being shouted at from both sides. Tribute. People remember the first service. Don't you love that? Do you remember the first service? So they did this tribute, 100 pages it turned out to be, and they talked about how they printed it on a hand press and whatnot, but that what it did, and this is a powerful thing for us to remember, is it helped him to rechannel some of that energy into a remembrance of the love that he had for his grandfather, to begin to feel the love again, to connect with our nature. Remember, our nature is inherently loving, and to begin to come to some peace with it. But what we're beginning to comprehend here in the West more and more, and certainly what we focus on in this spiritual community, is that we always want to work as deeply as we can. That it's important to work at what is the source. What is the very thing, what is the irritant that's still alive in us that this situation brought up and is causing the anger? And I think the support for this, I was just amazed to find that the support for this is in a Bible story that we on the staff and several of you have emailed me going, yes, but what about? And it's Jesus overturning the money changers' tables in the temple. We've been talking about as a staff, do you think what do you think was going on there? Do you think that Jesus just had sort of a slip in consciousness, or what exactly was that burst of anger that came up? Well, of course, in our first talk on this series, we talked about the fact that anger can really be a blessing, that anger brings about change. So Jesus could have been using that experience. But one thing that occurred to me this week and led me down this incredible journey was I realized I'm always focused on Jesus and the money changers. And for some reason, it just came to me in a quiet moment, they were in the temple. And immediately, one of the metaphysical interpretations of temple is it's our consciousness. Think about it. It is in our consciousness that we decide what we're going to worship, how we're going to worship, when we're going to worship, what we're going to align with. Are we going to align with our true nature, or are we going to align with something outside of our true nature, something that we think will give us what we want in our life? It's our temple. And out of that curiosity about temple, I started searching. I have this whole database of different books and stuff that have been computerized, and I can search by any subject, so I searched temple. And interestingly enough, one of my favorite metaphysicians, Ed Rabel, came up. And I loved reading his commentary. It was on this very scripture, right? I loved reading it because he starts out saying, well, I'm not exactly sure why this was included in the Bible, but the metaphysics are powerful, And that's the truth. He said, I want you to notice that Jesus could have run those money changers out of the temple, but he did not. Instead, he turned over their tables. He said, do you see, when we get angry, we want to push away the threat. And we think that the threat is outside of us, so we're never really looking at what's going on inside of us. But Jesus brilliantly turned the tables over, meaning we have to turn over whatever it is that is the stimulus for our anger and look at it from all sides, from all ends, not push it away, embrace it. He also said if Jesus had chased the money changers away, they would have found a way to get back in. And isn't that the truth? Come on, you know? How many times have we just wished that some issue would go away? Maybe we've tried to forget about it, we've repressed it, maybe we've done, childhood regression, who knows, all the things we've done, and whammo, pops right back up some way. So much better when we're willing to turn it over, when we're willing to see what's going on with it, and of course, then turn it over to Spirit, to recognize this is part of our humanness, not to reject it, but to embrace it, and to recognize that then often it softens, begins to integrate. This is not something that Ed pointed out, but it occurred to me, this is what the Christ Spirit does in us. It illumines what needs to be looked at. The Christ Spirit is never afraid to explore, to be curious, to dig up that which hurts, because it understands that we have infinite capacity as its expression. We can handle it. What was happening with Arun? I don't know. I don't know for sure. But we can come up with many different scenarios of situations where his desire to kill somebody would make sense. One that I was thinking of is just exploring attachment. Every child, every infant needs to feel attached, particularly to its mother, but also to its father. And most of you that are listening, you got enough attachment because you're highly enough functioning that you're out in the world and you're watching a video like this, a live stream like this. But even so, the part of us that didn't quite get connected with it, didn't feel the support of the attachment, it leaves a little hole in our psyche, a hole that we're always trying to fill up, and always trying to fill up from the outside. And so, if you can imagine having Mahatma Gandhi as your grandfather and getting to spend 2 years with him and having him, he moves just a little slower. He's very attentive to you. He sets great boundaries, but you can feel in them the love. He's playful. He meets you in a way that's loving, supportive, acknowledging of who and what you are. Would really fill up a hole if you have a hole around this whole thing of attachment. And then someone comes and kills him. And suddenly he's gone, and that hole is opened up. And naturally, if it's not been examined, the neural pathways take us to that guy has taken away something that I need. That guy needs to be punished. When the real opportunity is to turn within and to feel what it is that's really happening for us, to explore it. That's where we begin to have the healing. And so I get very excited. In the book, Arun talks about what he really needed to do, and it came, soon after, is he needed to start working on forgiveness. And next week, we're starting our fall program, which will include 7 weeks of content on Colin Tipping's radical forgiveness. Now, Colin is kind of radical in his perspective on life. Sue and I both read the entire book, and I said, Sue, I love this book, except, wow, I wish Colin hadn't shared some of his perspective on life. Because it's a no-fault, or it's a total fault perspective, that if something is happening into your life, your consciousness created it, your soul is working, has come into some kind of an agreement with another soul, and this is all working out for your greatest good. I can, buy some of that, but think about what that would put Arun Gandhi through, right? Okay, I have some much bigger reaction to my grandfather's loss than just feeling tremendous sadness and grief and needing to be with that sadness and grief. I've moved on to wanting to kill someone. There's something going on in me. And it'd be so easy then to go, wow, I killed my grandfather through my belief system. I don't know. I have trouble with that. What I see is that every time we react, and to recognize sometimes when we go down those neural pathways, we don't even recognize we're reacting in the moment. But when we recognize, maybe after the fact, that we've reacted, what a wonderful opportunity to then take the deep dive, go into the RAIN process that we worked with, and what the heck is going on here? And to recognize that it does free us up. It frees that energy up to be used in different ways. I'll use myself as a case in point. I've shared with you many times that when I hear a news story about, or even if any of you share a personal story of someone getting bullied, it used to bring up so much rage in me. Like, I've always given thanks that Subaru puts their steering wheels on very securely. Because, if I'm driving the car and that story comes up, I just start shaking that thing out of rage. And of course, I have a lot of understanding of it. I was repeatedly bullied as a kid. And the important thing to know is it's not enough just to recognize that inevitably when it comes up, the next time I have the opportunity to practice the RAIN process, I practice it. And the RAIN process is Tara Brach's process of going in and looking at what is really going on here for me. And if we are still reacting, my belief is there's still something to be seen. And I've seen progression in me. I've seen myself go from needing to shake my steering wheel like crazy to feeling the energy come up in me. It's still an amazingly powerful energy. But in the midst of that energy, I'm able to consider both parties in the story. I'm able to even reflect back on the young boys that predominantly were the ones that bullied me. I'm able to be curious about what's going on for them. I'm able to have compassion. Part of that compassion is that 2 of the 4 boys that really made my childhood hell have sought me out, have come to visit me in person, have apologized to me, and have shared with me the difficulties that they were going through at that time in their life. It helped me to realize it wasn't really personal to me, but in alignment with what Sue was talking about, humility, it also helped me to see that I too have expressed my frustration, my anger, in what could easily be considered bullying ways against people that seemed weaker than me. And without judgment. What I find interesting is in a time when I sometimes question whether what I do for work is having any impact, when the world seems to be getting more polarized, when there's more challenge, I feel this energy coming up in me saying, and this is the time. This is your time. Continue to share the message. Continue to teach. Clearly, this spirit within us, when it is freed in us, is totally about bringing the light, about sharing the love, about being the love. I think Mahatma Gandhi was really on to something. There's nothing that was shared. Oh, there are a couple more quotes. Maybe I should say those. These are a couple of things. Well, one of these, Mahatma Gandhi used to say, we must be the change we seek. How powerful that is. We must be the change that we seek. And he goes on, this is something that I think Arun's dad said. If we want this world to change, we have to change ourselves. If we want peace in the world, we have to find peace in ourselves. That's what happens when we're willing to treat the challenges of our life not as the universe being against us, but as an invitation to look at what's going on for us. As we get down to the very nuclear reactor, if you will, of that discomfort, it begins to soften. And we naturally, without having to focus on it, move into the state of spirit which is peace, which is love. Beautiful place to be. It's time for us to stop resisting the challenges that life puts us through, to begin to welcome them, to understand that they come to us to free us. They come to us to invite us to take a deeper dive. Or, if we're not reacting to them, they come to us to invite us into greater expression. It's all for our benefit. I don't know if Colin Tipping is right, that we've created it all, but it certainly benefits us. Take advantage of the benefit. Let's move into a time of some extended meditation and reflection. I invite you to join me in just taking a nice deep breath. And, if your judge is on you in this moment, and you'll know that because you're kind of feeling bad about the fact that you got angry, or, you're still in a pattern that you wish you were done with, you can just tell your judge to sit in the next room. It can have its little heyday in the next room. This is your time. Your time to just settle into the quiet and the peace. And to take, into consideration this idea of Mahatma Gandhi's that we're to use our anger intelligently. That this dynamic life force that has been channeled towards something that's frustrating us, something that's making us angry, can now be freed up. Freed up to do the work that needs to be done in our life or in the lives of others. We recognize in this moment that we are the living expression of spirit. If we don't do it, who's going to? And all we need to do is begin to engage with what's happening in our lives, with focus, with compassion, with understanding, to free up the spirit in us that is ready to guide us and to shine bright. And so we allow ourselves now to simply sit with that truth in the silence.